All right, I want to talk a little bit about ported saws. I've had tons of questions, had tons of people ask me about different saws and all this. And for the most part, all the saws that Aaron and Charles and Cajun and Gary Buxton and all those people have done for me, are, and even 309 machine, rip saw, they're all better than stock for sure. They cut better, they have more torque, whatever you want to call it. The thing is, it's all in what you want in a saw. And for instance, and I'm not bad mouthing anybody's work or trying to run nobody down or whatever, or say I like one saw better than the other out of the three. But a lot of people ask me out of the 400s, is Briscoe's the best, is Buxton's the best, or is Cajun's the best? And in a way, they're all really good for certain things. And let me tell you why. Okay, so these saws, all the newer saws like the M-Tronic Auto Tune, and even the 3 Series Huskies and the 461s and things like that, to me they have pretty good RPM from the factory. They're not like the old Home Lights or McCullochs where they're turning 8,000-9,000 RPM, and you raise the roof and get them up there zinging, and that helps them because they're already kind of torquey or whatever. So to me, you need to gain RPM in the cut. Free revs really doesn't matter. And for instance, some saws I've had, like the 309 machine, it zings way up there real quick, and it's only going to go so much because I'm pretty sure it has limited coil or whatever. I've never put a tack on it. And here's the thing, if I've got a fairly aggressive chain on it where it's self-feeding pretty good, say I'm bucking hardwood, firewood, and I've got it on the soft setting and I'm not applying no pressure, that saw is great. If I had the same kind of chain set up on the Buxton 500, that 309 machine 500i would probably outcut it. It would be faster in that cut. But then turn around and say I'm falling, or I'm in a big buck of firewood and I've got the chain set up at the hardwood setting and a pretty aggressive grind on it, and say I've got a 28-inch bar on it and I'm utilizing all the bar, that Buxton 500i is going to come out ahead. Or even if it doesn't come out ahead, it's more enjoyable to run in that scenario because it may not zing way up there and it may not cut as fast in those higher RPMs. But when the saw's working and it's range like 9 to 10,000 RPM, it's got more torque. And with more torque, you're going to gain more RPM in that scenario. For instance, I've done videos of it. You can see shorts of it. I go to lean on that 500 or the 309 500i, and it'll kind of fall on its face. Whereas the Buxton saw, it doesn't. It just sits down a little bit, drops a couple thousand RPMs, and powers on through it. And with if I ran a really high raker on that 309, it would be okay, or cutting softwood, it would probably be okay, but that's not what I'm cutting. And that's, I like setting my chains up because I do all sorts of different cutting. I like setting the chain up to where it self-feeds pretty good and it will fall and work if I need it, need to lean on it without it sounding like it's got the low raker blues. So that's the difference. And that's the same way kind of in the 400s. Gary Buxton's and Charles Briscoe's 400 is really, really close. They're pretty torquey. I mean, they've got good torque. But they got really good chain speed as well. And it's kind of the same thing with those two saws. And I know they still got a little more breaking into. I run Cajun saw for a long time, but I could put a 28-inch bar on Cajuns and bury it noodling and hardwood, and it's had the suspension upgraded, and you could see me pulling to where it bottomed the gas tank handle out on the chassis of the saw, pulling up with that buried, and it just sat down and went. It had more torque. Whereas the Buxton saw and the Briscoe saw, and I think the Buxton saw may be a little more torqueier than the Briscoe saw. It's hard for me to tell. I've run them side by side and they're so close, I can't really tell. But in the right condition, Charles's saw is fun to cut with. Like I was cutting that pine or whatever, it was beating the 500i through it, and I was leaning on harder in a way, or pretty ample pressure, you know what I'm saying? Not leaning on as hard as I could. If I was leaning on as hard as I could, of course the 500i would probably come out ahead, but normal cutting and not slacking off done, that's all was flat ripping. And it still cuts hardwood okay. It was anyway up there, and it cuts really fast, and then it'll set down a little more than Buxton saw does, but it'll still power through. It's really hard to explain without, I'm not trying to indicate that it's not good, because it's really fun saw to run. Actually, there's a guy wanting a 400 and a 201, and I'm keeping the Briscoe saw and selling the Buxton saw. But if I was cutting 10 and 12-inch wood, and that'd be the saw, because it comes through it, and it still cuts big stuff all right too. I could go fall a 2-foot tree with that saw, no problem. I'm not saying that. It's got plenty of torque, but Cajun saw just had quite a bit of torque, and it still had the revs of like a 60cc saw. That's why I enjoyed it so much. I mean, you can see it powering through against Cajun's 572, and walking off from it. It was just a really good build, and I think the compression may have been a little higher on that and stuff. And that's what I'm getting at. Everybody's work saw is different, but they're all pretty good, because I've had questions about that, like who do I get to port and everything. But for the most part, everybody's, I've got that Aaron A. Lynch 572, the Buxton 572, and Cajun 572, and they're all fairly close. Cajun's is a little more torqueier than Cajun's is a little more torqueier. Aaron's runs way up there, but it's still got pretty good torque. It's kind of like that 400 of Charles's, and Buxton's right there in the middle, both torque and zinginess, I guess you could say. And it's kind of the same way with those 400s. Briscoe's is like Aaron's 572, kind of way up there. Buxton's right in the middle, and Cajun's was more torquey, which when I talked to Cajun, every time I told him I wanted the built for torque. And so, depending on the cutting situations, if I'm going to buck firewood, I'm grabbing, and I fell with Aaron saw plenty, but or race or whatever, that Charles Briscoe 400 and Aaron's 572 would be the one I would grab, because it's probably going to make it fastest through the wood, because it's got ample torque, and it makes the torque up high, I guess you could say. Whereas Cajun saws makes the torque, like at 9,000 RPM or horsepower, whatever you want to say. It's really hard to explain, but That's kind of what it is, and that's just like the 500Is. You know, Buxton's right there in the middle. Aaron's 500i had the most torque of the Ripsaw and all them. You know, it's had the most torque that I've probably ran. Buxton's right there in the middle, 309, and Ripsaw and Buxton's right there in the middle, with Buxton's being a little better, and then Ripsaw, and then 309 machine at the highest as far as the way I like to cut. And depending on what you're doing, you know, if I'm going just to buck firewood and letting it self-feed, that 309 machine and the Ripsaw 500i probably would be it. And then, you know, if I'm falling and bucking and limbing, you know, Buxton's going to be middle of the board, the kind of the best of both worlds. And if I was just falling or doing really big bucks, you know, I'd grab that Aaron A. Lynch 500i and bury a 32-inch bar and not worry about it, you know, and be able to lean on it. So that's kind of the way I play it. Everybody builds them a little different, and they're all really similar. And when I'm talking about this, it's what's up, Mom?
Where you gonna do?
You're probably looking at it.
Down here?
Yeah, and I may go back to the hill and cut some wood.
I may run the front door.
Okay.
I'm gonna straight it. I don't know I'm very wrong.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yep.
Cause I mean.
Let me pause this real quick.
I like it too.